There is a moment in every intellectual tradition when skepticism goes too far. A moment when a philosophy, instead of sharpening the human mind, begins to dissolve it. This is the moment I call the sin of philosophy. The sin of philosophy is simple. When thinking becomes so doubtful, so suspicious, so self-critical, that it destroys the very tools it needs to think. It is the point where questioning no longer clarifies reality. It begins to erode reality itself. Where the search for truth becomes an attack on the idea of truth. Where reason is no longer a guide, but a target. And no movement in the modern world embodies this sin more completely than postmodernism. Postmodernism didn't arrive as a weapon. A soft voice telling us that truth is dangerous, that meaning is oppressive, that objectivity is an illusion. It told us that language cannot describe the world. That power hides behind every idea. That all we have are narratives, floating in the dark. But soon, the warning became an infection. The question, what if truth is more complicated, slowly became. Does truth even exist? The idea, language shapes our understanding, became. Language cannot touch reality at all. And the healthy doubt that once protected philosophy turned into a corrosive force eating away at its foundations. This chapter is the doorway into that collapse. Not the collapse of the world, but the collapse of our ability to speak about the world. A collapse that begins with intellectual elegance and ends in intellectual paralysis. Postmodernism represents philosophy at war with itself. A philosophy that uses reason to argue that reason cannot be trusted. A movement that weaponizes skepticism until nothing remains standing, not truth, not meaning, not identity, not even language. This is the sin of philosophy. A skepticism so absolute that it becomes indistinguishable from nihilism. And to understand how we reached this point, we must walk deeper into the postmodern thoughts. To understand the flaws of postmodernism, we first need to understand what it actually says. Not the memes. Not the political noise. But the core ideas that gave the movement its intellectual power. Postmodernism begins with a simple suspicion. What if everything we call truth is just a story? From that suspicion, 4 ideas emerged that shaped the entire movement. 1. Truth is a social construct. Postmodern thinkers argue that there is no objective truth waiting to be discovered. What we call truth is simply whatever a society agrees to believe. Science, morality, history, all of them are narratives built by culture. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is universal. Everything is relative to a context. This idea is the foundation. Once truth is questioned, everything else follows. 2. Language doesn't describe reality, it creates reality. For postmodernism, language is not a tool that points to the world. Language builds the world. Words are not mirrors. They are prisons. We do not use language to express thoughts. Language determines the thoughts we are capable of having. Derrida pushed this to the extreme. Meaning is never stable. Every text undermines itself. Interpretation has no floor, no ceiling, no anchor. 3. Knowledge is just a form of power. Michel Foucault's influence is everywhere. He claimed that what we call knowledge is only the mask worn by power. There is no objective biology, objective psychology, or objective ethics. There are only systems of control hiding inside institutions, discourses, and definitions. To define something is to dominate it. To classify something is to regulate it. Knowledge is not truth, it is strategy. Religion, science, progress, enlightenment, human rights, postmodernists call these grand narratives. Large stories that claim to explain the world. According to Lyotard, humanity should no longer trust these narratives. They are simplifications, illusions, and tools used to control mass thinking. Postmodernism presents itself as a rebellion against certainty, but its greatest weakness is that it cannot survive its own logic. The moment you examine its claims with the same skepticism it uses on everything else, the entire structure collapses. The contradictions aren't hidden. They are built into the foundation. The first contradiction is this: postmodernism denies the existence of objective truth, yet it delivers its own claims as if they are unquestionably true. If all truth is relative, then the statement, "truth is relative," must also be relative. If all knowledge is a social construct, then the idea that knowledge is a social construct is itself just another narrative. Postmodernism saws off the branch it sits on, then pretends it is still floating in the air. The second contradiction is its view of language. Postmodern thinkers insist that language cannot represent reality, that words never truly connect with the world outside of them. But they write books, give lectures, and construct complex arguments trying to convince us of precisely that point. If language cannot communicate truth, then their own language communicates nothing. If meaning endlessly deconstructs itself, then their philosophy cannot mean anything at all. A theory that invalidates all discourse ends up invalidating itself. The third contradiction lies in the obsession with power. If every idea is a hidden attempt to dominate others, then postmodernism is just another power move. Its critique destroys its own moral position. If we cannot escape power, then no one, including the postmodern philosopher, has the authority to critique anyone else. The moment they speak, they fall into the same trap they accuse others of. The fourth contradiction emerges from moral relativism. When all values are merely narratives, and no narrative is superior to another, then no action can be condemned. Justice becomes an opinion. Cruelty becomes a perspective. Genocide and human rights stand on the same level, competing stories with no objective difference. Postmodernism wants to criticize oppression while simultaneously denying the existence of objective moral standards that make oppression wrong in the first place. These contradictions are not minor flaws. They are fatal. A philosophy that rejects truth cannot claim to reveal truth. A philosophy that denies meaning cannot produce meaning. A philosophy that reduces everything to narratives cannot demand to be taken seriously. In trying to free humanity from every structure, postmodernism destroys the structure of thought itself. This is the point where postmodernism collapses into silence. A silence caused not by humility, but by logical suicide. And yet, despite this collapse, the philosophy still spread far beyond academia, shaping culture in ways its creators never predicted. That is where the story continues. If postmodernism teaches us anything, it is that doubt can consume thought, and skepticism can destroy the very foundations of reason. It shows the fragility of mind and meaning when philosophy turns against itself. But the question we must now face is deeper than critique. If philosophy cannot speak of truth, if it cannot approach reality, if it cannot offer guidance in life, then what is left for it to do? Do we abandon the search altogether, drifting in a world where meaning is denied, values are suspended, and identity is fragmented? Or do we dare to confront uncertainty, to navigate doubt with care, to build rather than destroy? The sin of philosophy is not simply error. It is the refusal to think responsibly, the surrender of reason to nihilism, the turning of skepticism into self-destruction. To witness this is to see the mind in collapse. To resist it is to recognize that thought is both fragile and indispensable. The choice remains with us. We can accept the endless deconstruction of postmodernism, living in a world where nothing stands, nothing matters, nothing can be trusted. Or we can embrace a philosophy that questions, yes, but also creates, that doubts, but also acts, that recognizes the void, but still chooses to illuminate. Philosophy is a tool. It can liberate or it can annihilate. Postmodernism shows us the danger of the latter. Nietzsche, and those who follow the path beyond, show us the possibility of the former. And in the end, the question is not merely intellectual. It is existential. If we cannot speak of truth, reality, or meaning, what remains for the human mind, for the human soul, for the human life itself? Postmodernism did not stay in dusty university halls. It escaped into culture, seeping into art, literature, politics, and the way people understand themselves. What began as a set of philosophical ideas became a worldview, shaping how entire generations think, feel, and act. It transformed the simple question, what is true, into, what is my truth? Objective facts were replaced by subjective experience, and personal perspective became the measure of reality. History became stories to be interpreted, not events to be understood. Science became just another discourse, one voice among many. Art and literature abandoned representation, truth, and form, embracing fragmentation, pastiche, and endless self-reference. Every narrative, no matter how unstable, was treated as equally valid. Identity, once a stable concept, became fluid and fractured. People were told that their sense of self was nothing more than a collection of roles, labels, and narratives imposed by society. Authenticity became performative. Every individual had to construct themselves endlessly, navigating a maze of contradictions and ever-shifting social expectations. This cultural infection also reshaped morality. If all values are narratives, then every belief system, every ethical principle, is merely a product of context and power. Right and wrong were no longer anchored in reason or consequence. They became opinions, experiences, and feelings. The moral compass itself began to spin without a pole, leaving a sense of emptiness and disorientation. Even language, once a bridge to understanding, became a tool of ambiguity and manipulation. Words were no longer trusted to communicate reality. They were used to signal allegiance, identity, or resistance. Every statement carried hidden power, every conversation became a battlefield. Postmodernism does not only affect ideas, it affects the mind. It reshapes how we think, feel, and experience ourselves. When all truths are relative, all meaning fragile, and all identities constructed, the human psyche begins to fracture. The first cost is the loss of meaning. Life is no longer a story with direction or purpose. Every action, every choice, becomes just another fragment, floating in a sea of interpretations. Achievements feel hollow because nothing can be objectively valued. Goals are arbitrary because no principle can be universal. The mind searches for coherence, but the philosophy that surrounds it tells it coherence is an illusion. Identity becomes unstable. When the self is understood as merely a collection of social labels, narratives, and external perspectives, the core of the individual dissolves. People are told to constantly reinvent themselves, to perform authenticity rather than possess it. The result is confusion, anxiety, and an endless sense of incompleteness. The self becomes a ghost in its own life. Moral paralysis follows naturally. When every value is contingent and relative, the mind cannot distinguish better from worse. Decisions feel meaningless because the framework that once guided judgment has been dismantled. Compassion, justice, and even self-interest become uncertain. Ethics itself is no longer a guide, it is just another story among countless stories. The relentless doubt that postmodernism encourages produces a state of perpetual questioning. The mind cannot rest, because every thought, every belief, every perception is suspect. Skepticism that was meant to illuminate becomes a prison, trapping the psyche in a constant loop of uncertainty and despair. This is the psychological weight of postmodernism. It is subtle at first, almost seductive. It offers liberation from dogma, but the liberation is hollow. It promises freedom, but the freedom is a kind of vertigo, a constant falling with no ground. Postmodernism leaves us in a landscape of doubt, fragmentation, and uncertainty. But the collapse of old structures does not have to mean the end of thought. There is a path beyond postmodernism, a way to confront skepticism without surrendering to it. The first step is to reclaim reason. Skepticism is a tool, not a weapon. Questioning assumptions can sharpen the mind, but it cannot replace the pursuit of understanding. Philosophy must once again aim to illuminate, not destroy. Doubt must guide inquiry, not erase it. The second step is to acknowledge reality. Language matters, experience matters, and consequences matter. While no perception is perfectly objective, some understandings are closer to reality than others. Ideas can be tested, refined, and judged for their coherence and usefulness. We do not abandon truth, we approach it carefully, with humility and rigor. The third step is to create meaning rather than wait for it. Postmodernism tears down old narratives, leaving emptiness. We must construct new frameworks, grounded in reason, experience, and reflection. Values are not mere illusions to be dismissed, they are tools for living, guides for action, and measures of human flourishing. Finally, we must take responsibility for thought itself. Philosophy cannot escape the human mind. Every idea we hold shapes the world we inhabit. To think is to act. To doubt is to decide. To question without direction is to drift. To question with purpose is to build. The path beyond postmodernism does not deny its lessons. It recognizes that certainty is rare, that power structures influence knowledge, and that narratives shape understanding. But it does not surrender to them. It does not reduce life to fragments. It does not treat doubt as an end. It uses skepticism as a tool to navigate, clarify, and create. In choosing this path, philosophy ceases to be a sin. It becomes a responsibility, a craft, and a force capable of expanding human understanding rather than consuming.